All right, guys, we're in that fall transition. We're getting those first few cold fronts of the year where the water's really starting to cool down, and we're starting to target those fish that are targeting bait fish themselves. They're starting to run through these big balls of bait, and they're starting to key on that giant mass that starts to move into these creeks and onto the flats, and they're starting to gear up for winter. So shad are the really big forage in the fall transition period. They start coming out of that deep water, migrating towards the backs of the creeks. Fish come off of that bluegill bite, and they really start looking for big balls of shad to run through and gorge themselves on for the winter. So I really like to focus on moving baits in that fall transition. That water's starting to cool down and fish get really active this time of the year. They do get harder to catch, but they get really active. And they get harder to catch because the amount of bait that's available to them to eat. So matching the hatch is really important, and getting as close to what they're eating. That way you can maximize your time on the water. One, I'm gonna start off with a topwater walking style bait. I really like to throw this in your pockets, right down the middle of a gut of a pocket in the fall. That bait concentrates a lot of times to the middle of those drains as these cool nights, and then throughout the day as it warms up, they start to transition back onto the flats, and then at night they come back. So when you get out there in the evening and you start seeing fish blow up in the middle of those pockets, you know, topwater bait is the ideal thing to throw. So much fun. This is just happens to be a sexy dog, and it's one of mine that I keep tied on all the time. You know, another bait that I really like to throw is a jerkbait. This is, you know, just a very shad pattern jerkbait. It doesn't go real deep. You're looking at, you know, maybe 4 or 5 feet. It just mimics one of those bait fish that are wounded, that have been through a ball of bait, or the fish have been through a ball of bait, and this is a wounded bait fish now that's kind of fluttering around by itself away from the group. And, you know, you're just gonna catch more. Again, this is kind of a down the middle of a drain. If you see some fish blowing up that you can't get them to commit to a topwater bait, then you can go straight to a jerkbait and you can catch them that way. You know, I like a little bit smaller jerkbait in the fall just because the fish are feeding generally and keying on really small shad, from as big as your thumbnail all the way to, you know, the size of your thumb, an inch long. And, you know, the smaller the profile, you're matching the hatch, you're just gonna get more bites out of that deal. I'm wanting to work this bait quick and erratically. I'm not wanting it to set still very long at all. And that way the fish don't get a real good look at it, and all they're doing is they're blinded by their love for the forage, and they're gonna just completely attack it. Versus when it's cold outside and you have cold water temperatures and you're fishing a jerkbait, you want that jerkbait with that long pause. And then you're gonna jerk again once or twice and you're gonna wait. That's not what I wanna do in the fall. In the fall, I want to rip this thing. I want it moving, I want reflections, I want actions, and I wanna get that reaction bite out of those fish because they're actively feeding. One of my absolute favorites to fish in the fall is a lipless crankbait. This is a red-eye shad. It is really, really close to the hatch that these fish are keying on. We have giant masses of bait that move into the shallows, and they come in huge balls. And you see these balls of bait scatter as bass run through them, and they're feeding, they're gorging themselves on. When I'm out fishing and I see a fish blow up, or if I'm just covering a long stretch of bank and I don't see a lot out on the bank, whether it be a rock transition or just a flat to get to where I'm going to the back of a pocket, I'm gonna have a red-eye shad or a lipless crankbait in my hand, especially this 1/4 ounce size. It's truly really close to what they're feeding on, and I'm gonna just produce more fish with it. I feel like this thing is so universal. You can fish it so many ways. I keep it in my hand when I'm moving across long distances through the backs of these pockets and across these shallow flats. It's a chunk as far as you can get it and wind it back as quick as you can. I will yo-yo it. I'll drag it a little bit on the bottom, meaning I'll let it actually go to the bottom, and then I'll actually just pick my rod tip up and I'll slow roll it across the bottom, because a lot of times these fish that are blowing up on this bait and running through these balls of bait, they run through a ball of bait and then they go right back to the bottom and they just wait for their next opportunity for a ball of bait to swim over. So instead of going over their head like you will with a topwater bait whenever they're actively feeding, if these fish are back on the bottom underneath the ball of bait, which is where they position themselves, you drag this lipless crankbait through there and they're gonna think it's just a free meal. So if it's a shallow pocket, this is what I'm throwing. Now, as I transition into deeper pockets where I go around the corner and I come into a pocket that doesn't have those flat backs of them, I'm gonna pick up a square bill, a 1.5, any kind of shad pattern, whites, oyster, you know, anything that looks like a shad is gonna draw what you're looking for, because the fish, again, are keying on shad. Basically, when I get into a little bit more graded pocket, you know, they'll have those 45-degree angles and bluffy walls and things like that. I'm gonna go straight to a 1.5, something that gets down and digs a little deeper and gets down quicker and then holds the depth. So when I'm fishing, I don't have to let my bait sink. I don't have to roll it as slow to get it down there. I want to crank this thing and I want to bounce it off everything I can hit it on. If it's rock, if it's limbs, it doesn't matter. I want this bait to be reactive. I want it to be erratic. That's all you're doing with this time of the year, is you're mimicking those bait fish that are coming to the back, and you're just mimicking a one that's maybe wounded or away from the group, and that you're getting by the bass that are just, all they're doing is laying there waiting for the next meal. If they're tracking a ball of bait, like we said, just on the bottom underneath them, or if they're actually just laid on a high spot or a limb or a lay down that's out across there that you can't see, and they're just waiting for the balls of bait to swim into the backs of those pockets so they can ambush it. If I get into a pocket where there's any kind of cover like grass, hydrilla, milfoil, anything with grass that I can't get my crankbait to come through, I'll go straight to a bladed jig. You know, a bladed jig has become a staple in the industry. If you don't have it tied on, a lot of times you're fishing behind the times, and you know, a thunder cricket, a bladed jig in general, this time of the year, also a fantastic way to catch a lot of fish. You know, those shallow flats, those pad stalk fields, things like that, when those fish start to move back in, I can also, you know, keep this bait in my hand as I go around, and you know, you're fishing through a pad stalk field and you come to some docks. Awesome at skipping. You can skip this thing back through there and continue to keep going, and it's exactly what the fish are looking for. Usually they're feeding on those shad. You know, this is a little bit bigger profile, but at the same time it's moving quicker. They don't get as good a look at it, so you're getting that reaction bite. One of the greatest things about a bladed jig, and I think everyone's come to find this, is there's no right or wrong way to fish this bait. You can throw this bait out, you can let it go to the bottom, and you can pump it back, winding it the whole time, and it mimics a fish that's wounded. You can take this bait, you can throw it back, and you can burn it subsurface. You can take this bait back and you can throw it, and you can try to bounce it off of every dock pole. You can try to bounce it off of laydowns. You can bounce it off of anything that you want it to hit. It works great in grass. In fact, it's superior in grass to a lot of your other baits. So there's no right or wrong way to fish a bladed jig. When you put it in your hand, you start going, it's just a great way. And if you'll notice, all these baits today are all tied together by one color, and that's white. White is just a thing in the fall that I really believe in. I know how much that fish are sight feeding and how much they're keyed on those big balls of bait that we keep talking about. That is the key, matching the hatch again, matching the color, getting out there and not trying to show them a crawfish color or try to show them a bluegill color when truthfully the forage is shad. That's the big key this time of the year. I'm not saying you can't catch them on something else, but I'm just telling you, this is the time of the year when the bait moves in and the bass start putting on those big bellies that we see in the winter. Might as well match what they're eating. There are a lot of great baits out there that you can fish for these fish this time of the year. It doesn't matter, whatever you have your confidence in. These are just a few of my favorites that I like to keep tied on. Maybe they'll help you guys out.